Good morning and welcome to episode 113 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined as I am each and every Tuesday by Hays Carlyon, the co-host of the Frangie Show, which you can catch on 92.5 FM, 1010XL, each weekday afternoon from 4 to 6 p.m. Hays, welcome back to the show. Looking forward to talking draft with you one more time before we actually get to the big event.
Absolutely, Gus. It's here. I'm ready. Let's make a pick.
All right, we're going to fire it up, Hays, this morning. I know I'm fired up to actually get to draft day, but we still got 3 days. We're recording this Tuesday morning. The draft begins Thursday evening at 8 p.m. We'll have plenty of programming throughout the day on Thursday and obviously throughout the draft this weekend. But make sure to stay tuned for all of our programming, including a special edition of Duval Rundown on Thursday evening that Hays will be a part of. But we're not there yet, Hays. It's still just Tuesday, and there's plenty of rumors floating about not only about the NFL draft as a whole, but specifically as it pertains to the Jacksonville Jaguars, because it seems like the first 3 or even 4 draft picks this year are kind of turning to be set, where Cam Ward will be the first overall pick to the Titans. Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter will be the next 2 picks in some order because they're the consensus top 2 players in the draft. And then it seems like New England is really honing in on Will Campbell at 4th overall. And so the draft seemingly starts with Jacksonville at 5, where that's the spot that people are unsure about what direction they're going to go in, which is interesting because a week ago, everyone was convinced that they were going to draft Mason Graham, assuming that he was still going to be there. And so what do you think of all the recent smoke haze where, like, Ashton Genty was picking up a lot of steam last week? This week, Adam Schefter is a bit on a warpath, saying that, like, he does not expect Mason Graham to be the pick straight up. Ted McMillan has kind of re-entered the conversation. Do you think that all of this is just like a great smokescreen by the Jaguars and it was always going to be Mason Graham? Or do you think there is credence to this and the Jaguars are truly a wild card at this stage?
I think it falls into like normal draft theory. When you're at this stage of the process, 20% of that is probably true. So what is the 20% that's true? I think the 20% that's true is I don't think the pick is Mason Graham. I just think that it's almost like it's been the pick for so long. I think people were mocking Mason Graham to the Jaguars at 5 before Liam Cohen and James Gladstone were even hired. It just seems like one of those things that's just been in place for so long that people, like analysts, start to just fixate on, well, that's what's going to happen. And if they take Mason Graham, I think it's a solid pick. But I do think as you get further into it, it's just such a deep class at defensive tackle. You can help yourself out in the 3rd round very easily with a minimum drop off, I would say. And so I don't think the fit is maybe as great as we thought. In the need, I don't think the need is there, but I don't think it's necessarily a need that you have to address at 5. Now, if it was Mason Graham and then a bunch of stiffs in this draft at defensive tackle, then I think you'd have more of a case. But I just think the Jaguars, James Gladstone, Liam Cohen, and Baselli, I think they're going to look at this draft in terms of playing the game and attacking positions that are scarce more than attacking positions that are loaded. So I'll say that the Mason Graham thing, I buy that it's probably not going to be Mason Graham. I like Tedero McMillan. I would be surprised if he goes at 5, but if that's the direction they want to go in, I think he's a perfect complement to Brian Thomas Jr. It's just, can you draft a number 2 wide receiver at 5? I mean, I'd have no problem with it. Those are expensive positions now. So you've got BTJ and you'd have T-Mac on very inexpensive rookie contracts for many years to go, which would help as you navigate the Trevor Lawrence contract and things like that. The Genty thing, I don't buy at all. Yeah. And if they take Ashton Genty, okay, it'll be exciting. But I just don't think that that's how you start building a program where your EVP has said publicly that you're starting at ground zero. I just don't know how you then can justify a running back at 5. And again, this goes into long-term roster building. I mean, why would you take someone at 5 that there's a very small chance you're going to sign to a second contract, which is just the case of things. You're already going to, I mean, let's assume Trevor Lawrence is who they think he is. So when Genty's contract comes up, you're already paying your quarterback a ton of money. By that point, you'll be paying BTJ a ton of money.
Yep.
We'll see with Trayvon Walker, Josh Hines-Allen, guys like that. But I just don't think that you're going to be in a position to pay Ashton Genty huge money. And that's the good problem. That's if he's good. And obviously there's a chance that, he won't be. 60% of these picks are not going to work out in the first round. So we can sit here and we all, this guy can't miss. This guy's generation. This guy's a superstar. We have no idea. The gap from college football to the NFL is gargantuan. So anyway, I gave you way too much there, and I apologize for droning on. But so that's how I feel about those 3 specific things that Schefter reported about. What about you? How would you feel about some of the stuff that he's got out there?
Yeah. I mean, as recently as on yesterday's show, I was still adamant that it was all smoke, and I was still expecting Mason Graham to be the pick. But now with how adamant Adam Schefter is saying pulling the Lee Corso quote of whoa, not so fast. It feels like Schefter has been sitting on this nugget for months, and now all of a sudden he's like, yeah, no, I always knew that the Jags were never going to draft Mason Graham. And so that's really interesting. I think that the point that you make about the depth of the class is a really important one where I think the Jaguars aren't in a position to pass on Mason Graham because this draft class actually does have a decent amount of not just good interior defensive linemen, but good interior defensive linemen with pass rush use, which is not always the case in the NFL draft. And then when you talk about Tech McMillan and the receiver group, I think that even if this receiver class might not necessarily have true alpha number 1 receiver prospects the way that last year had Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison. Honestly, Brian Thomas might be the number 1 receiver prospect of this year's class. But that said, even if it's not super strong at the top, I don't think it's a super deep receiver class either. And it seems like the Jaguars are pretty adamant in getting a long-term number 2/1B alongside BT for the long haul. And so I would understand it from that perspective in terms of going for Tet. But if Mason Graham is not the pick, then I think my prediction might be Jaylen Walker becoming a Jaguar because what Adam Schefter, his part of his case, and certainly other people have said this too, is that basically after Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter, the rest of the class prospects from roughly 4 or 5 to 30 or 31 are all pretty rated pretty similarly, and there's not a big gap between those guys. And so if there's not a big gap, then you might want to get the guy that does have the highest floor and someone you do feel confident about being not just in the building for a long time, but a truly positive impact. And Jaylen Walker has been hailed as potentially the most intangibly rich prospect in the class. I think that Anthony Campanile would certainly have a lot of time deploying him in various deployments on the defensive front. And I think that Walker's floor, it seems like, is 8th overall to the Panthers. Seems like the Panthers are not going to let Jaylen Walker get past them. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Jaguars just ended up snatching him up at 5th overall. So yeah.
If it's Jaylen Walker, then Gus, how would you deploy him, and whose playing time do you think he would cut into?
I guess Devin Lloyd's potentially. I don't know. I think that they can do a decent amount of 3 linebacker sets on base downs, and then just kind of crowd the line of scrimmage, especially on late downs, but even on early downs as well. I've gone on record saying that I'm a fan of Devin Lloyd. Certainly want to see him for a year in this scheme, and would be excited by the prospect of keeping him around long term. I don't think the Jaguars should be necessarily thinking, okay, Lloyd's in the last year of his contract, and we're going to need to solve the linebacker problem next offseason. But I think that there's not a lot of depth at linebacker behind Lloyd and Foye Oluokun. There's not a lot of depth at edge behind Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines-Allen. And so I feel like Jaylen Walker can just fill a lot of depth pieces for the Jaguars, honestly, and be primarily an edge player, but certainly drop back into coverage, certainly line up at a couple different spots, both on the line of scrimmage, mugging up on the A gap and blitzing across the center space, but then also even just playing off-ball linebacker in some certain cases, again, to just make it tough for opposing offenses. I think he can truly be deployed all over the place. And so that would make it a little bit easier to like not feel like you have to take certain players off the field, I think. So Hays, I mean, do you have what's your lean? Is it Tet McMillan right now for the 5th overall pick? I mean, if you, I know we still got 2 or 3 days, and so you'll have plenty of other opportunities on other shows to say your
I like Tero McMillan, but it's not the direction, and that it may be what they do. If you're asking me, I guess at this point, what do I think they will do? I'll say McMillan, but this is what they should do. They should take an offensive lineman at 5.
Yeah.
I mean, this idea that they have solved their offensive line problems by signing 4 free agents, really only one of which I think the majority of clubs might like to have as a starter in Macari. It doesn't make any sense to me. The offensive line isn't fixed. It's not even close to fixed. I mean, to me, it's you look at what they've got, and you've subbed out Mitch Morse for Robert Hainsey. Well, I don't know that that's a significant upgrade.
Yeah.
At right guard, you've subbed out Brandon Sheriff for Patrick Macari, we believe, is where Macari will play. Well, Macari's better now, but Sheriff's had the better career. So I don't know that that's like a unbelievable upgrade. The other 2 guys you signed, the money tells us, are swing guys. Now maybe Fred Johnson, maybe they've got a bigger role in mind, but this is a player that was on the open market and got a 1-year deal for like $1.2 million. Mm-hmm. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the other 31 clubs don't believe this guy was a starter. No one was willing to give him starter money. And the Jaguars ended up getting a great deal, a very cheap player. But normally that doesn't translate to that guy can give us 17 games at left tackle. It's a guy you feel good about playing in a pinch. So look at the totality of the offensive line and in terms of their starting 5, and they don't rotate. So the starting 5 that you would ideally like to play all 1,000 snaps you're going to have, is it really any better from last year? I don't know how you can make the case that it is. I mean, it's maybe deeper. It's maybe guys that, are going to be better for what Liam Cohen wants to do. But I don't know that you could say it's appreciably better. And so, I look at it and say, again, you talk about scarcity in the draft. There just aren't any offensive tackles in this draft. And if you don't take one at 5, you're not getting one. And, and so I look at it, and you really set the tone for the draft. It's interesting. Everybody has their first round pick. So no team really has control of the draft with multiple selections in the first round. So what makes that interesting is it's going to be who sets the tone by taking the position, a premium position that doesn't have a lot of depth in this draft. Who attacks that first? Because that's going to be the team that sets the tone in this draft. And if the Jaguars take an offensive tackle at 5, whether it's, ideally it would be Will Campbell, but if he's not there, you take Armand Membo, or you take, if they like Banks better from Texas, you take Banks. But what that does is it puts immense pressure on teams that need tackle help. And so that does 2 things. A, it ensures that it's going to be harder for Houston to get an offensive tackle when they're up on the clock in the mid-20s. The other thing, too, is if there's a rush, which I think there would be, because, again, teams are going to know that if we don't take our guy here, there's not going to be a guy the next time we're on the clock. Well, what that does is it pushes a potential receiver to you at 36. So to me, it would be I would take an offensive lineman at 5 and again, going through the guys we went through. And, and then I would really have a conversation about Anton Harrison being my left tackle. Let's assume it's Campbell's gone to the Patriots. So you take Membo at 5. out of Missouri, who I think you like. We've talked about him. I think you were the first one a couple months ago saying that you really like this kid. And so I want you to.
I've been like nitpicky about like the fit with the Jaguars since they do have two solid tackles, but like I think I'm overthinking that, honestly. Like I think Membu's a great player, especially at a premium position. He would be a great pick at 5 for sure.
Yeah, so you take Membu, who is a right tackle.
Yeah.
So you have Armand Membu as your right tackle. You move Anton Harrison to left tackle, which he can absolutely play. You have Walker Little probably be your left guard because I just don't think Ezra Cleveland fits. And so he just becomes a reserve or they'll try and get a ham sandwich for him in a trade. And okay, so now you have really improved your line. I mean, now there has been – so now looking at it, you've got Anton Harrison at left tackle. You've got, let's just assume, Walker Little at left guard. You've got Hansey at center, Makari at right guard, and you've got Armand Membu at right tackle. Now you have accomplished, you would think, what James Gladstone talked about at the Combine of setting the dish for Trevor Lawrence so that he can feel confident about stepping into throws. And if you take offensive line at 5, that opens you up to being able to take receiver at 36. You know, whether that's somebody like a Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. You know, you got to feel good about maybe you get lucky in Abuka or Burden or a guy like that is at 36. Yeah. But you pretty much know Jaden Higgins will be. And there's a lot of Ted McMillan in his game. He's a big target. So if that's the kind of guy you're looking for, then, you know, that's a pretty good fit. And then at 70, you can attack the defensive tackle depth, get your D tackle there. You can get a defensive end with the other third rounder to help you with your edge depth there. And then in the 4th round, you can take with those 2 picks, a corner and a running back. So to me, it just the value sets up best if they attack offensive tackle at 5. And if they do that, I think it puts immense pressure, particularly on the Texans, if that's the direction they go in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like certainly Mason Graham to the Jaguars has been like one of the most popular mock fits throughout the whole draft cycle, but especially following free agency when the Texans trade away Laramie Tunsil, just like any offensive tackle, the best offensive tackle prospects has always been mocked to the Texans. And so, yeah, it certainly create a lot of problems potentially for not just the Texans, but a lot of teams around the league. I really like the way you broke it out where like considering the depth of the class, but also the Jaguars' needs, it makes a lot of sense to go offensive line 1st round, wide receiver 2nd round, and then start double dipping at the defensive line later in the draft during the middle rounds. I certainly agree with you where like the offensive line kind of needed surgery this offseason in Jacksonville, and instead they just kind of threw some Band-Aids at it. And so, yeah, I think that an offensive tackle should not surprise anyone if it is the pick, especially considering that it was, I believe, 30 years ago today on this exact date that the Jaguars spent its first ever draft pick on Tony Baselli, who's, of course, now in his first year as the executive vice president of football operations. And so if history repeats itself, again, I don't think anyone should be surprised. I think we broke it out well where like now that Mason Graham seems like he actually won't be the pick, you and I have Ted McMillan and Jaylen Walker on our minds, but we think that offensive line would be the best route to go. Let me throw one more scenario at you, though. I'm Andrew Berry, and you're Hays Carlyon, the general manager of the Jaguars, and I say, hey, Hays, respect your work a lot. You do a lot of good things down there in Jacksonville. We're interested in moving off the 2nd overall pick for a haul. Would you be willing to move the 5th overall pick plus your 1st rounder next year, plus your 3rd rounder next year in order to move up and go get you a Travis Hunter? What do you say?
It's a great question, but I would say no. This team isn't good enough to give up a future 1st rounder. I mean, for all we know, these guys may not know what they're doing. I mean, none of them have ever done it before. Yeah. So this could be a disaster. And if it's a disaster and you're sitting there with a top 4 pick that you've now given away, and I think Travis Hunter has the potential to be great, but that'd be too much for me. I mean, just because. Again, they didn't end up with the 5th pick by accident. I mean, they won 4 games last year. So, I mean, I think that they have a chance to be a lot better, but I don't feel good enough about it to guarantee my 1st round pick to somebody to get a receiver. So, I think it'd be a lot of fun to have Travis Hunter, but no, I mean, to me, I think it'd be hard to justify for a team that picks routinely more in the top 5 than they do in the last 5 picks of the first round. What about you?
Yeah, it's fair. I think I might do it, but you're talking me out of it a little bit. I think you bring a pretty realistic case. It's almost like Ashton Genty, where it's like, yeah, we can all agree he's a fantastic player, but like, does that allocation of resources really make sense for the team in this timeline? Or even if they have a quarterback and a few other really good players, like they are in year 1 of a new regime, they're doing a soft rebuild, and so yeah, like the potential of like not taking that offer and then Travis Hunter making it to the Hall of Fame is a little bit scary, but not as scary as the other side of the coin where like you make that trade, but then like Hunter isn't enough to elevate your team and you're still a bottom 5 roster anyway. And now all of a sudden you don't have a top 5 or top 10 pick. So that definitely makes a lot of sense. But Hays, it seems like Jayden Higgins you're a fan of in the second round as a potential day 2 pass catching option for the Jaguars. Are there any other receiver prospects that stand out to you as kind of like your guys that you'd really like to see drafted by the Jaguars? Or even if you don't think it's a great fit for the Jaguars, just prospects that you really like in this draft?
Well, I think receiver, as you go through it, is a monster need. Just like for fun, I'll go through and kind of do a 7 round just to have an idea of how I think the board will go. And so a week ago I was doing one and I didn't take a receiver until I think it was the first pick in the 4th round. And I just was like, this is way too late. I mean, they've got to get receiver. I think you can make an argument. It is the number 1 need. Now, again, you have to weigh all of that with, what physicality and things of that nature on both sides of the ball.
Right.
But I will say this, I think it'd be hard for them to wait past the 2nd round to address receiver. I mean, if something happens to Brian Thomas Jr., it's an expansion level group of receivers. I mean, it's De'Ami Brown, Parker Washington, and Gabe Davis. I mean, and you have to be mindful of that. I mean, you have to understand that BTJ may not be available to you for 17 games. What are you going to do when that happens? Now, that's a lot to put on a rookie, but I would bet on Jayden Higgins or certainly Tet McMillan more than I'd bet on De'Ami Brown. I mean, and certainly Parker Washington and Gabe Davis. So, I think it's arguably their biggest need. And even if Brian Thomas Jr. is healthy, I think you can still have a fair amount of skepticism on De'Ami Brown coming here and going from a guy who's never caught more than, I think, 35 passes in a season to a guy that's going to catch 70. Parker Washington is a guy who I don't even think had 400 yards receiving last year, is a guy that is going to blossom into this, much better, double his production kind of guy. And Gabe Davis, I mean, how could you count on him for anything? We don't know what his health is. So I think this is what I would say. I think at receiver, you don't really have to worry about investigating too far down into the 3rd, 4th, 5th round and beyond guys, because I just don't think they can wait. I think they've got to, if they don't take receiver at 5, I really don't think they can pass on 36. And I think it'll align. I think worst case scenario is like, a guy like Jayden Higgins would be, I think you could pretty much say, wouldn't you agree that there's probably a 95% chance that Jayden Higgins is there at 36?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I would too. So if that's worst case scenario, then I think you feel good about that. And look, maybe somebody falls to 36 that's not a receiver that you just can't believe is there, and you take that player and you hope for the best with that first pick in the 3rd round. But receiver to me is a gigantic need. And so that's how I look at it. What do you see? Am I off on evaluating this receiving core?
One of the specific questions I had for you that you kind of just like already answered on your end was just like, how high do you expect the Jaguars to take pass catcher? I think that especially like if you just kind of like remove trenches, then like easily wide receiver is the biggest need on the Jaguars. Because even if they do have Brian Thomas, even if their like depth isn't awful, like they need a little bit more just like juice and a little bit more, if not star power, just power, I guess, in that group. And I think that, like, yeah, once they get to 36 overall, I'm sure they'll be really hoping that Egbuka is either there or like in a spot where they could trade up only a few spots to get him and not have to give up much draft capital. But then if say Egbuka goes off the board in like the middle of the first round or like in the 20s of the first round, then I think they're definitely going to be like considering all their different like backup possibilities. Maybe they trade back a little bit in the second round and they're still able to get a really good receiver. But if they wait around until the third round, like then at that point, it's just like kind of niche guys who are in like specific roles. And like, that's okay. But like, I think the Jaguars are certainly looking for someone who can be on the field for the majority of snaps and be the true number 2 to Brian Thomas, both in 2025 and beyond. And so Jaden Higgins, certainly a guy that I've liked pretty much throughout the draft process. I feel like he has at least the production profile to be a first-round pick, but maybe there's some concerns about like his athletic upside that's making him not be a first-rounder. But I'd be cool with him at 36. I'd also be cool with Alec Aominor from Stanford at 36 overall, because I feel like he might be like the most intangibly rich receiver prospect in the class, just in terms of like the way that he competes and blocks his butt off, and like it just shows up on film. Like this guy could be working at Google since he's going to Stanford, like be like a future astronaut, but instead he's just like destroying opposing defensive backs on every single snap, whether it's pass routes or run blocks. And so he certainly has a little bit. He might not have like the highest ceiling because he's like a little bit stiff and that doesn't have like amazing long speed, but he has enough long speed and he's got a really good frame. And so if he can pick up some technical things in terms of like route running at the top of the stem, some technique in terms of his like contested catches at the catch point, even though he's certainly made his fair share of acrobatic catches. I think that because of his frame and because of his like competitive toughness, there's going to be a lot to work with there. And so I think, again, Alec Aominor is kind of the guy that I've definitely got my eyes watching for the Jaguars specifically in day 2 of the draft. That's pretty much all I've got, Hays. Any other lingering thoughts or any other kind of like questions that you're looking forward to getting answered by the Jaguars once draft weekend is over?
I think it'll be just a lot of fun seeing how they go about it. The Athletics' Jordan Rodriguez, wrote a great feature on James Gladstone that I just read it this morning right before we went on. So I'm assuming it published this morning, but I would encourage Jaguar fans to go give that a read. It'll get you fired up about your new GM. So that I'll leave you with this. I think the Jaguars are in good shape. I'm really excited to see the direction that they take this thing in, because this will really kind of give us our biggest indication of what they're trying to accomplish. In free agency, you're sort of limited, obviously, by who's on the market and things like that, and they were very active. But this, I think, is really going to be what is going to be the heart of this new program. Is this draft class? So that's exciting. I'll give you a prediction, non-Jaguars related, for the draft.
Okay.
Shedeur Sanders will not be one of the first 3 quarterbacks taken in this draft.
Wow. So it'll be Jackson Dart and Jalen Milroe, you think, in front of him?
Could be, or Shuck.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I could see it. It'll be really interesting to see, especially what the Browns do at 2, because I feel like they're pretty set on taking Travis Hunter at 2, and then probably shocking most people by taking Milroe or Chuck or maybe Dart if he's there. Yeah, the Browns and the Saints are definitely 2 teams to kind of watch out for, as like who knows kind of like how desperate they'll be and like what they want at the quarterback position. So I love that one, Hays. I don't have anything hot off the top of my head other than the mock trade proposal that I sent you for Travis Hunter. But we'll have plenty of time on various shows leading up to the draft to get out the rest of our takes. So make sure to check out the article on The Athletic that Hays just mentioned. And Jordan Rodriguez does amazing work covering the Rams, which is certainly relevant for Jaguars fans this season. Check out Duval Rundown the rest of the week, including Thursday night when Hays will be back to help me break down not just the Jaguars' pick, but what the Jaguars could do during a pre-draft show leading up to the draft. So special edition of Duval Rundown for round 1 will be going live from 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern. So looking forward to having Hays back on then. So yeah, that'll do it for today. Hays, it was a pleasure as always. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, enjoyed it, Gus. Take care.
Alrighty. Thanks, Hays. Thanks to everyone for watching and listening and commenting. That's right, Gracious. I need Shipley to keep me sharp on my takes when Ship. That was a good take by Hays. I'll come tomorrow with something good. But yeah, until next time, guys. 9:04 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. I'll be back with Sean Syed of Sumer Sports. Really excited for that conversation with him. Adios.